Hello, my name is David Hartman, and this is the Authorizer self-assessment session. This session is conducted as part of the Wisconsin Authorizer Support Project, which is funded by the Wisconsin Resource Center for Charter Schools. During this session, we plan to introduce the cycle for effective authorizing, explain the self-assessment process, and explain the directions for it. You will have an opportunity to engage in independent work to self-assess your authorizing office. You will then prioritize areas of highest need for continuous improvement. And finally, you'll create an action plan to fulfill or move forward on your continuous improvement process. So the Wisconsin Authorizer Support Project has overall objectives and session objectives. So the overall objectives are to promote high quality charter schools and authorizing excellence, to promote national principles and standards for charter school authorizing, and review authorizer performance through a lens of continuous improvement. This session today is to introduce the importance of a clear understanding of the relationship between the authorizer and the charter school governing board, to discuss how authorizers can self-assess their performance as a charter school authorizer, to explore specific roles and responsibilities for authorizers, and finally, to prioritize areas for continuous improvement. So, we believe that effective authorizing is based on a clear relationship. So the charter school contract or the charter contract is an agreement that is the foundation and should serve as the basis for everything that a charter school authorizer and charter school board does. Within it, all of the expectations and deliverables ought to be identified clearly and understood by both parties. The authorizer's role is to hold the charter school accountable to the terms that are identified in the contract. Now that is often like a boring legalistic document. However, those are the legal expectations that the authorizer and the board engage in, and it's the authorizer's responsibility to make sure that the board fulfills those expectations. So the board is to create the conditions for the educational program to succeed, to create a program that is ready to fulfill all of those expectations and satisfy the performance expectations. The authorizer, their main responsibility is to provide oversight of the charter school's performance so that they can achieve the results that are identified in it. And those results are identified as academic, financial, operational, and compliance expectations. And so it is the authorizer's role to make sure that the board fulfills those. At SchoolWorks, we see that relationship manifest as the cycle of effective authorizing. So it starts in the upper left-hand corner, the authorization process. Now, many people call that application process. The charter school authorizer is defined by their authorization of a nonprofit board to fulfill expectations that they put into a proposal. That is called the authorization process or the application. So it is of high importance that those expectations are identified clearly through the application and reviewed thoroughly so that you make sure that those expectations are set early and fulfilled through that process. Once a school is authorized or approved to become a charter, then you move into the contracting phase. The contracting phase, as identified through this relationship in the previous slide, is important. So things that are not clearly understood or defined clearly become issues further down the road, because ultimately you need to be able to know what defines your relationship. So performance contracting is where the specificity lies and the expectations are negotiated on the front end. Once a school board and an authorizer agree to what's in the contract, then the board engages in a process to create the program and operate the school. Once that's happening, then the authorizer moves into the third phase, which is oversight. So within the oversight phase, they do site visits, they look at reports, they look at outcomes for academics or finances or operations associated with the expectations that are defined in the contract. At certain points, that performance, whether it's operational, financial, or academic, may or may not meet the expectations that are within the contract. Now, ultimately, that's determined at the end of the renewal process. However, in the midst of a contract term, whether it's 5 years or 3 years, an authorizer may intervene and identify corrective action because the performance of the school is not meeting or clearly well below the expectations that are defined within the contract. That is an appropriate action of the authorizer in order to set or clarify those expectations through that process. Ultimately, the fifth phase of the process is the renewal process. So at the end of the contract term, or in the last year of the contract term, the authorizer engages in a process in which they review the evidence of the performance of the charter school over the course of that contract. Then they make a renewal decision to non-renew, renew for a short term, or renew for a full term at the end of that process. And then they enter back into the cycle of effective authorizing. So this process that we're engaging in today is a self-assessment to help you to achieve effective authorizing. So this is, let's call it a simple process because you are engaging in it on your own. It's a self-assessment of your own authorizing practices. Schoolworks engages in a much more comprehensive process that is an option, but not part of this particular session, in which third-party reviewers engage in review of your documentation, engage in interviews of your authorizing staff, and consider all of that evidence up against criteria of effective authorizing. It all manifests itself in a report with ratings and evidence, and ultimately leads to an action planning process in which your office can prioritize the most important issues and identify an action plan to fulfill the most important issues that you want to address in order to fulfill continuous improvement. So this process today is a self-assessment. It has 21 standards. These 21 standards are available in the rubric that's in the resources area within Buzz. And it's a tool that you need to fill out as part of this. Now, there are 21 standards that are based on the National Association of Charter School Authorizers, Principles and Standards. Those 21 standards are grouped into 5 categories. Agency commitment and capacity, which is how have you organized and defined the roles within your organization? B, application process and decision making. That's the authorization process I noted before. C, performance contracting. As we noted before, the contract is of paramount importance that you define clearly your expectations. So this considers those. D, ongoing oversight and evaluation. So how do you engage? What are the expectations you have? What are the processes you have in considering your oversight of an operational school? And then finally, revocation and renewal decision-making. So at the end of that performance contract, what are your processes and what are your expectations for determining whether or not the school will be renewed? So the rubric that we'll use and is available in the resources area within this Buzz course, it's organized into these categories. So there's a standard. So for each of the 21 standards, at the top it's numbered. So in this one, it's fair and transparent quality focused procedures. Underneath it in the gray are the criteria, and those are bulleted, and that delineates more specifically what those expectations are for fair, transparent, and quality-focused procedures. Underneath, and this is standard across all 21 of the standards, are the ratings. And so you will engage in identifying what the rating is in two categories, established and implemented. So you'll decide whether or not you are not established, whether you're established or established with quality. And additionally, you will decide whether you have not implemented that practice, whether you've implemented or implemented it with quality. In the bottom, there's an area for you to record your evidence. So at SchoolWorks and with high quality authorizing, we know that you don't do things just because they feel right or it seems right. You have to identify everything with evidence. So with this process, we fulfill that as well. And so with any rating that you identify, you need to identify the evidence that supports that particular rating. So you hold yourself accountable to not just seeming like it's right, but having evidence to support it. So more specifically, when we consider each of the standards, like I said, not established, established, or established with quality, and then the implementation ratings. So the first row is, have you established expectations, tools, and processes? So really, what are those things that you define either through your contract or your processes, whether it's your application or your renewal process, your oversight process, your expectations for monthly reports? So how clearly have you defined those things? And so each standard will delineate what the specifics are, and then you can determine whether or not that's established, not, or established with quality. Implementation, some authorizers who have not engaged in the process for a long time may not have reached renewal. So they may not have implemented their renewal processes, so that's okay, but you'll just note it as not implemented. In the case of, say, your contracting process, you'll consider whether or not you've implemented that or implemented it with quality. So you'll look at the criteria there to determine, have you satisfied the majority of those criteria, and is there evidence to support those? Ultimately, within the rubric itself, you will review each standard, you will apply 2 ratings or assign 2 ratings for each, and then you will identify the evidence for each. So we find that it may be helpful to consider all of this information in this way. So there are slides that are in the next step of this process that walk through each one of the standards, and they're each organized in the same way of the example that you're looking at. So you have the standard at the top, and then in the pink, in this case, you have the criteria. On the right-hand column, you have yes or no, and so you can consider yes or no. Do we have a clear mission for quality authorizing? Is it identified? Is it specific to authorizing? Is it clear? Does it really get to quality authorizing? Yes or no? So this is essentially a process or a worksheet for you to be able to fulfill that information. And ultimately, you will use that information to achieve your rating of implemented or established and implemented for each one of the standards. So once you fill out that rubric, then there is a second activity that we will look at, and there will be a video where I'll fulfill that with you and help you to satisfy it. I'm glad that you're engaging in this process, and I look forward to your results.